The desert sun beat down on Thomas Blackhawk's weathered fence as he spotted her. A stranger with trembling hands applying fresh white paint to his property. Her clothes were tattered, her body thin from hunger, yet she worked with determination. When she finally noticed him watching, fear flashed across her face. She stammered about thinking the place was abandoned, offering to work for just a place to rest. Instead of anger, Thomas offered his canteen. She hesitated before accepting, their fingers briefly touching. A moment that would alter both their damaged lives forever. What secrets had driven this woman to seek refuge on an Apache's forgotten ranch? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn painted the Arizona sky in watercolor hues of amber and rose as Thomas Blackhawk stepped onto his porch, steaming coffee mug in hand. The silver canteen he'd offered the stranger yesterday hung from his belt, a habit from his army days he couldn't shake. 23 years of military service had taught him to read people, and that woman had the look of someone running scared. His eyes traced the freshly painted section of fence, crisp white against weathered wood. Good work, careful work. Not the hasty strokes of someone simply passing through. Thomas had returned to his ancestral land 5 years ago after Margaret passed. Cancer took her quick, but not quick enough to spare her the suffering. Their son James had been gone nearly 15 years by then. A car accident during Thomas's 3rd deployment. The quiet of the ranch had been both sanctuary and prison since. Movement from the barn drew his attention. The woman emerged cautiously, squinting against the morning light. She'd slept there, then. Thomas hadn't expected her to stay the night, but something about that didn't displease him. She froze when she saw him watching, like a deer catching a hunter's scent. Her shoulders tensed, ready for flight. Instead of approaching, Thomas simply raised his mug in acknowledgement and turned toward the house. A moment later, he returned with a second mug and set it on the porch railing before stepping back. Minutes passed before she ventured forward, retrieving the coffee with a nod that might have been gratitude. Her hands were blistered from yesterday's work. "There's food inside," Thomas said, his voice rough from disuse. She hesitated, studying him with wary blue eyes. "I can work more." "For the food." Thomas shrugged. "Fence needs painting." Over a simple breakfast of eggs and toast, Thomas learned her name was Sarah. No last name offered. She ate like someone accustomed to hunger, with the careful restraint of making each bite last. "Been on the road long?" Thomas asked, keeping his tone neutral. Sarah tensed. "A few months." Thomas nodded, not pressing further. He recognized the signs, the flinching at sudden movements, eyes constantly checking exits, the hypervigilance. Someone had hurt this woman badly. "Guest cabin needs cleaning, but it's yours if you want it," Thomas said, surprising himself with the offer. "In exchange for the fence work." Sarah studied him, searching for the trap. "Why would you do that?" Thomas stood and carried his plate to the sink. "Fence needs painting," he repeated. "Been meaning to do it for years." Later, as Thomas showed Sarah the cabin, a small structure his grandfather had built for visiting relatives, he remembered the old man's words. "Sometimes the wounded seek out the wounded. It's the Creator's way of healing two souls at once." The cabin had gathered dust since Thomas's cousin visited last Christmas, but it was solid. A bed, bathroom, small kitchenette. Sarah stood in the doorway, her meager possessions clutched in a weathered backpack. "I don't have money for rent," she said, chin lifting slightly. "Didn't ask for any," Thomas replied. As he walked back to the main house, Thomas glanced at the fence stretching around his property. 80 acres of land that had been in his family for generations. The white paint would take weeks to complete. He found himself hoping she would stay that long. That evening, from his workshop window, Thomas watched Sarah return to the fence with a determination that spoke of someone desperate to prove their worth. As darkness approached, He brought a lantern out to her without a word. Their silence was comfortable in a way Thomas hadn't experienced since Margaret. Not the hollow silence of loneliness, but the quiet understanding of two people who recognized pain in each other and respected its boundaries. "My grandfather built that fence when I was 10, Thomas said, surprising himself by speaking. Taught me how to set posts that would last 100 years. Sarah's brush paused. It's a good fence. Strong bones. Thomas nodded and left her to work, the lantern light casting her shadow long against the newly whitened boards. Sarah settled into the cabin with the efficiency of someone accustomed to making temporary spaces habitable. By sunset, she had scrubbed every surface, arranged her few possessions with precision, and swept the wooden floors until they gleamed. The work gloves Thomas had left for her, worn leather with remnants of white paint, rested on the small table by the door, ready for tomorrow. In her previous life, before Daniel Elizabeth Sarah Chambers had maintained an immaculate home in Scottsdale, Daniel had insisted on it, critiquing any imperfection with increasing cruelty as their marriage progressed. A reflection of your worth, he'd call it, inspecting surfaces for dust with the white glove he kept specifically for that purpose. Now, cleaning gave her control, a small victory in a life that had spiraled beyond recognition. From his kitchen window, Thomas observed her methodical movements with quiet approval. The woman worked like someone with something to prove. Morning came with the scent of rain on the horizon. Sarah was already at the fence when Thomas emerged from the house, her borrowed gloves protecting hands he'd noticed were soft despite their blisters, not the hands of someone accustomed to manual labor. "Storm coming," Thomas said, nodding toward gathering clouds. Sarah glanced up, brush paused mid-stroke. "I'll work faster." Thomas shook his head. "Paint won't set right in the humidity. Different job today." He led her to the barn where fence posts needed sorting, old ones to be replaced, new ones to be treated. They worked in companionable silence until the rumble of an approaching truck interrupted their rhythm. Sarah's body tensed immediately, eyes darting toward the cabin as if measuring the distance to safety. "My cousin," Thomas explained, recognizing Miguel's vehicle. Miguel Blackhawk had Thomas's height but carried more weight, his Apache features softened by his mother's Hispanic heritage. He emerged from the truck with a wide smile that faltered slightly at the sight of Sarah. "Finally hired help for this place?" Miguel asked, embracing Thomas with a hearty slap on the back. "Sarah's staying in the cabin, painting the fence." Thomas's tone discouraged further questions. Miguel raised an eyebrow but didn't press. He'd known Thomas long enough to recognize when a subject was closed. Instead, he discussed tribal council matters and delivered groceries Thomas had asked for last week, a standing arrangement since Thomas rarely went to town himself. Before leaving, Miguel pulled Thomas aside. "You know anything about her?" Thomas watched Sarah, who had retreated to sorting nails with unnecessary concentration. "Enough. Be careful, cousin. The wounded ones can turn unpredictable." "So can we all," Thomas replied, ending the conversation. After Miguel left, Sarah's shoulders remained tight, her movements guarded. "Your family won't approve of a white woman staying here. My land. My choice." Thomas handed her a jar of fence post preservative. "Miguel means well." The rain arrived shortly after noon, sending them into the barn. While Sarah organized tools with meticulous care, Thomas retreated to his workshop in the back corner, a space he hadn't shown her yet. There, he lost himself in the familiar motions of carving, knife sliding through cedar with practiced precision. Later, Thomas found Sarah at the fence despite the drizzle, working well past reasonable hours. The sight stirred something he'd thought long buried, concern for someone beyond himself. "Enough for today," he called. She looked up, rain plastering her hair to her face. "I can finish this section tomorrow," Thomas insisted, holding out a towel. Sarah hesitated before accepting it, revealing the core of their unspoken agreement. her need to earn her keep meeting his unexpected willingness to offer sanctuary. As she dried her face, Thomas noticed calluses beginning to form on her fingers, small transformations taking place alongside the larger ones neither of them was ready to acknowledge. That night, Thomas carved later than usual, his knife finding the shape of a small bird within the cedar. He couldn't have explained why, even to himself, except that he'd seen Sarah watching the cardinals that nested near the cabin with a wistfulness that echoed in his own chest. Sometimes, Thomas knew, healing began with the smallest gestures. 3 weeks passed, marked by the steady progression of white paint along the fence line. Sarah's presence had settled into the rhythm of the ranch, her morning coffee on the cabin porch, the scrape of her ladder moving along the fence, the soft closing of her door at night. Thomas found himself listening for these sounds, anchors in days that had drifted formlessly since Margaret's passing. One morning, Thomas emerged to find Sarah not at the fence but kneeling in the overgrown patch behind the house that had once been Margaret's vegetable garden. Her hands worked methodically, pulling weeds and turning soil that hadn't felt human touch in 5 years. "Hope you don't mind," she said, wiping sweat from her brow when she noticed him watching. Seemed a waste of good ground. Thomas stood silent, unexpected emotion tightening his chest. Margaret had loved this garden, coaxing desert-hardy vegetables from the reluctant earth. After she died, he couldn't bear to tend it, letting the land reclaim what she had cultivated. Without speaking, Thomas walked to the shed and returned with his grandmother's wooden seed box. The lid, carved with traditional Apache symbols for growth and abundance, creaked as he opened it. "My grandmother's," he explained, setting it beside Sarah. "Margaret used them too." Sarah's fingers hovered over the packets, reverently touching the handwritten labels. "You're sure?" Thomas nodded, then knelt across from her, his large hands looking out of place among the delicate seedlings Sarah had already sorted. "The corn and beans should be planted together," he said, his voice low. "Grandmother called them sisters. The beans climb the corn and fix the soil." "The 3 sisters," Sarah said, surprising him. "My grandmother taught me 2 corn, beans, and squash. I grew up on a farm in Nebraska before." She trailed off, the before hanging between them, before whatever drove her to his fence with nothing but determination and fear. They worked side by side until midday, the shared knowledge of growing things bridging cultures and pasts. Sarah's knowledge was practical and expansive. She spoke of companion planting and natural pest deterrence, her voice gaining confidence with each explanation. "You miss it," Thomas observed. "Farming." Sarah's hands stilled in the dirt. "Yes, it was before Daniel, my husband. When I married him, we moved to the city. He didn't want dirt under his wife's fingernails." Her voice hardened at the memory. "He preferred I focus on maintaining our home and social obligations." It was the most she'd revealed about her past, and Thomas received it quietly, understanding the trust it represented. By evening, they had prepared the entire garden bed and planted the first seeds. Standing back to survey their work, Sarah looked truly at peace for the first time since her arrival. "Thank you," she said simply. That night, Thomas watched from his window as Sarah stood in the moonlight, gazing at the freshly turned earth with a small smile. For the first time since arriving, her shoulders weren't hunched in perpetual vigilance. Morning brought dark clouds gathering on the horizon, a late summer storm brewing. Thomas found Sarah reinforcing the garden with row covers and makeshift windbreaks. "Big one coming," he said, helping her secure the last cover. "Flash flood warning on the radio." Sarah nodded, her hands efficient. "The seeds will hold if the ground doesn't wash away." As the wind picked up, they worked together to secure loose items around the property. The easy coordination of their movements spoke of a partnership forming beyond mere coexistence. When the first heavy drops began to fall, they hurried to the house, the sudden downpour chasing them to the porch. Standing there, watching sheets of rain soak the newly planted garden, Thomas realized Sarah was laughing, a sound he hadn't heard from her before. The joy of it caught him by surprise, and he found himself smiling in response. Inside, shaking water from their clothes, Sarah's eyes fell on the photographs Thomas kept on his mantle. Margaret with James on his 10th birthday, the last photo taken before the accident. Thomas saw her notice, but she asked no questions, respecting the boundaries of his grief as he respected hers. That night, for the first time since arriving, Sarah slept without nightmares. The trading post sat at the junction of the highway and the dirt road leading to the reservation, a weathered building that served as grocery store, post office, and community hub for the scattered population. Thomas hadn't visited in nearly 2 months, but his supplies were running low, necessitating the 30-minute drive. "You don't have to come," he told Sarah, who stood uncertainly by his truck. "I'd like to," she said, though her body language spoke otherwise. She wore one of Thomas's old denim shirts over her t-shirt, the sleeves rolled up multiple times, and a battered straw hat pulled low over her eyes. The drive passed in comfortable silence until they crested the hill overlooking the neighboring property. Earth movers and construction equipment stood parked in neat rows. "What are they building?" Sarah asked. Thomas's jaw tightened. "Nothing yet. Desert Creek Development's been trying to buy up land around here for years. Luxury homes and a golf course." He nodded toward the equipment. "They're always making sure I see what's coming." Sarah studied the machines. "But not on your land." "Not while I'm breathing," Thomas replied. Grace Running Bear had owned the trading post for 30 years, inheriting it from her father who'd run it for 40 before that. Her face brightened when Thomas entered, then registered surprise at the woman trailing behind him. "Thomas Blackhawk, twice in one season. The world must be ending," Grace teased. Her silver-streaked hair pulled into a traditional bun. Her keen eyes took in Sarah's hunched posture and careful movements. "Need supplies," Thomas said simply. "This is Sarah. She's staying at the ranch for a while. Helping out." Grace's eyebrows rose slightly, but she smiled warmly. "Any friend of Thomas is welcome here. Take your time looking around." While Thomas collected groceries, Sarah wandered the small store, pausing at a rack of newspapers. Thomas watched her body stiffen as she picked up a copy of the Arizona Republic, her eyes fixed on something in its pages. When she thought no one was looking, she folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. At the register, Grace leaned close to Thomas. "First time you've brought anyone here since Margaret," she observed quietly. Thomas didn't respond, but his lack of denial was answer enough. "She has the look of someone hiding," Grace continued, bagging their purchases. "Be careful, Thomas." "Always am," he replied. On the drive home, they passed a black SUV with tinted windows heading toward town. Sarah sank lower in her seat until it was out of sight. "The developers?" she asked, voice tight. Thomas shook his head. "Don't recognize it." Back at the ranch, Sarah disappeared into her cabin while Thomas unloaded supplies. Later, he spotted the newspaper in the trash bin outside her door, a section torn out. Respecting her privacy, he didn't investigate further. That evening, Sarah worked on the fence with unusual intensity, her brush strokes almost aggressive. Thomas brought her water and stood nearby, offering silent company until she was ready to speak. "The people who owned this land before you," she finally said, "were they Apache too?" "Always been Blackhawk land," Thomas replied. "My great-grandfather received it in the 1880s for scouting for the army. One of the few families that kept their original allotment." Sarah nodded, processing this information. "The developers, they offer you money?" "More each time. Last offer was $2 million. Thomas gazed across his property, the mountains silhouetted against the setting sun, the ancient saguaros standing sentinel. "Some things don't have a price." Sarah's brush paused. "But if you needed the money—" "Do you think I need money?" Thomas asked. Sarah studied him, reassessing. I don't know what you need. Thomas almost smiled. Neither do I most days. Later that night, from his workshop window, Thomas saw light in Sarah's cabin at an unusual hour. Through the half-drawn curtains, he glimpsed her reading a crumpled piece of newspaper by lamplight. Her expression was tense, frightened. The next morning, Thomas found Sarah had left a folded piece of paper under his coffee mug. Inside was a neatly clipped newspaper article with a photograph of a woman, Sarah, though with styled hair and elegant clothes, alongside a man in an expensive suit. The headline read, "Tech CEO offers $50,000 reward for information on missing wife." Thomas carefully refolded the article and placed it in his shirt pocket, understanding the trust she just placed in him. When Sarah appeared for breakfast, neither mentioned the article, but something had shifted between them, the unspoken acknowledgement of dangers circling closer. 2 months into Sarah's stay, the fence gleamed white under the autumn sun, a testament to her diligence. The garden had begun yielding its first harvest, tender lettuce and radishes that Sarah prepared with quiet pride. Thomas found himself looking forward to their shared meals, the silence between them now comfortable rather than cautious. In his workshop, Thomas put the finishing touches on the cedar carving he'd been working on for weeks. The small bird, a cardinal with wings partially extended, fit in his palm, each feather detailed with painstaking precision. He hadn't made a gift for anyone since the jewelry box he'd carved for Margaret's last birthday. That evening, Sarah sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the mountains in deepening purples. Thomas lowered himself beside her, the wooden bird concealed in his hand. "Nearly done with the fence," she observed, her voice holding a question neither had addressed. What would happen when the work was finished? Thomas nodded, then extended his closed fist. Sarah looked at him quizzically before holding out her hand. The wooden cardinal settled into her palm, its polished surface catching the fading light. "It's beautiful," she whispered, turning it to examine every detail. "You made this." "Been carving since I was a boy. My grandfather taught me." Thomas watched her fingers trace the bird's wings. "Noticed you watching the cardinals." Sarah smiled, the expression transforming her face. "My grandmother had feeders all around her farm. Cardinals were her favorite. She said they were messengers carrying our prayers." She looked at Thomas with sudden curiosity. "Do the Apache have stories about birds?" "Many. The eagle carries prayers to Creator. Hummingbird brings joy." Thomas hesitated before adding, "Cardinals represent confidence, standing your ground." Sarah's eyes glistened as she closed her fingers gently around the carving. "Thank you." Later that night, as they sat at the kitchen table with mugs of coffee, Sarah spoke more openly than ever before. "My full name is Elizabeth Sarah Chambers," she said, looking into her mug rather than at Thomas. "I've gone by my middle name since leaving. Sarah was my grandmother's name." Thomas absorbed this information silently, recognizing the gift of trust it represented. "Daniel, my husband, he changed my name to Elizabeth when we married," said Sarah. Sounded too plain for the wife of a rising tech executive. Her bitter smile didn't reach her eyes. "He changed a lot of things about me." Thomas nodded, understanding deeper meanings beneath her words. "Names have power." "Yes." Sarah took a deep breath. "Your land, it's important to your people, isn't it? Beyond just property." Thomas considered how to explain. "My great-grandfather was a scout for the U.S. Army. The government allotted him this land when many Apache were forced onto reservations. He chose this place because of the springs in the foothills. Water is sacred. My grandfather said our ancestors' spirits recognized this land as home." He gestured toward the window. "I feel them sometimes, when the wind changes." Sarah nodded, seemingly comforted by his belief in things unseen. "I felt safe here, safer than I've felt in years." The next morning brought a certified letter, another offer from Desert Creek Development, higher than the last. Thomas placed it unopened in the drawer with the others. Sarah found him on the roof later, replacing weathered shingles. Without a word, she climbed the ladder to join him, and they worked side by side through the afternoon. The ease of their partnership had become familiar, their movements complementary despite never being discussed. As evening approached, Sarah paused, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I've been thinking about ways to make the ranch more sustainable. The south field gets good sun, perfect for solar panels, and the old barn could be converted to guest quarters." Thomas looked at her with surprise. "Guest quarters?" Sarah flushed. "I was reading about cultural tourism. People pay good money to experience authentic ranch life, learn traditional skills." She hesitated. "Just ideas, to make the place more viable." Thomas studied her, recognizing what she wasn't saying, her hope to stay, to contribute, to build something beyond temporary sanctuary. He felt a warmth in his chest he'd almost forgotten. "Good ideas," he said simply, and was rewarded with her smile. That night, a letter arrived addressed to Sarah, forwarded through a women's shelter in Phoenix. Thomas recognized the official letterhead of a law firm. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened it, but her expression remained unreadable as she tucked it away without comment. The wooden cardinal now sat on her windowsill, facing east toward the rising sun. The hottest day of late summer arrived like a furnace door opening, the temperature climbing past 100 degrees before noon. Thomas found Sarah at the irrigation system that fed the garden, methodically clearing blockages in the ancient pipes. "Need to replace these," he said, kneeling beside her to examine a corroded joint. Sarah nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. "I can splice them temporarily, but the whole system needs updating if we're expanding the garden." Thomas noted her use of "we" without commenting. 3 months on his land had changed her. Her skin sun-darkened, her once soft hands now calloused, her movements confident where they had once been hesitant. They worked through the heat of the day, falling into the wordless rhythm they'd developed. Sarah seemed to anticipate his needs, handing him tools before he asked, holding pipes steady while he connected fittings. By late afternoon, water flowed smoothly through the repaired lines, the garden drinking deeply. While cleaning tools in the barn, Thomas uncovered an old radio his father had kept on his workbench, a solid Bakelite model from the 1960s. He brought it to the house, where Sarah examined it with interest. "The capacitors are probably shot," she said, opening the back panel and studying the components. "But I might be able to fix it." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You know electronics?" A shadow crossed Sarah's face. Daniel's first startup was electronics repair. Before the tech boom, I helped him build the business before he. She trailed off, then refocused on the radio. "I'll need some basic tools and parts." By evening, Sarah had the radio working, soft music filling the kitchen as they prepared dinner together. The simple domesticity of the moment struck Thomas with unexpected force. How long had it been since his home held anything but solitary silence? A Roy Orbison song began playing, the rich voice filling the room. Sarah paused in slicing vegetables, a small smile touching her lips. "My parents danced to this at their wedding," she said. "My father would pull my mother into the kitchen to dance whenever it came on the radio." The memory seemed to surprise her with its sweetness rather than pain. Without thinking, Thomas extended his hand. Sarah hesitated, vulnerability flashing across her face before she set down the knife and placed her hand in his. Their dance was awkward at first. Thomas hadn't danced since Margaret, and Sarah moved with the careful distance of someone unaccustomed to gentle touch. But as the song continued, they found a tentative rhythm, maintaining a respectful space between them while moving in harmony. When the song ended, they separated naturally, returning to dinner preparation without acknowledging what had passed between them. Yet something had shifted. A door opened that neither was ready to step through but could no longer pretend didn't exist. Over dinner, Thomas spoke more than usual, telling Sarah about his wife's illness, how the doctors had diagnosed Margaret's cancer too late, how he'd been overseas when she received the news. I requested compassionate leave, but by the time I got home, she'd already started treatment. She never blamed me for not being there, but I blamed myself. Thomas's voice grew rough. Still do. Sarah listened without interruption, offering no empty reassurances. When he finished, she shared a piece of her own past. I taught piano before I met Daniel. Dreamed of opening a music school for children. Her fingers moved unconsciously, as if playing invisible keys. Daniel said it was impractical. Said I needed to focus on being a corporate wife. Their exchange of stories felt significant. Gifts offered with care, received with respect. The peaceful evening shattered with the sound of an approaching vehicle. Thomas tensed immediately, moving to the window. A black SUV with the Desert Creek Development logo crawled past the property, slowing as it passed the newly painted fence. Sarah stood frozen by the table until the vehicle disappeared down the road. "They've never come this late," Thomas said, watching until the taillights vanished. When he turned back, Sarah's expression had changed, the openness of moments before replaced by calculated assessment. "They saw me," Thomas nodded. "Probably." That night, Thomas heard Sarah's cabin door open long after midnight. From his window, he watched her pace the yard in the moonlight, her posture speaking of difficult decisions being weighed. The wooden cardinal on her windowsill had been turned to face west, toward escape, not sunrise. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon as Thomas checked the weather radio. Flash flood warnings covered the entire county, with predictions of the worst storm in a decade. He found Sarah already securing the garden, her movements precise and focused. "Need to move the animals to higher ground," Thomas said, eyeing the rapidly darkening sky. They worked efficiently through the afternoon, preparing the ranch for the coming deluge. As thunder rumbled closer, Thomas retrieved a small wooden box from his bedroom, his most precious possessions secured inside. From it, he withdrew a turquoise necklace, the stones set in intricate silver work that had been his mother's. When Sarah came in from securing the last of the outbuildings, he held it out to her. "Storm's going to be bad," he said. "My mother would say turquoise offers protection." Sarah stared at the necklace, understanding the significance of the gesture. "Thomas, I can't. Please." He rarely used the word, and it hung between them with unspoken weight. Slowly, Sarah turned and lifted her hair. Thomas fastened the clasp, his calloused fingers brushing the nape of her neck. She touched the stones resting against her collarbone, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. "Thank you," she whispered. The storm hit with unexpected ferocity just after nightfall. Wind howled around the corners of the house, rain lashing the windows with such force it seemed the glass might shatter. When the power failed, Thomas lit kerosene lamps while Sarah monitored the weather radio. "Flash flood warning upgraded," she reported, her voice tight. "They're reporting water overtopping the banks at Deer Creek." Thomas's expression darkened. "If Deer Creek's flooded, the wash behind the property will be next." He moved to the window, peering into the darkness. "We need to get to the root cellar. Now." They grabbed emergency supplies and hurried through the downpour to the root cellar behind the house, a concrete bunker built into the hillside that had sheltered generations of Blackhawks from desert storms. Inside, Thomas secured the heavy door against the wind while Sarah arranged the lanterns. The small space, lined with preserved foods and emergency supplies, had an air of both security and confinement. Sarah paced the narrow confines while Thomas sat calmly on a bench, listening to the storm's fury. "Been through worse," he said, attempting to ease her anxiety. Sarah stopped pacing, her hand clutching the turquoise at her throat. "I need to tell you something. In case." She didn't finish the thought. Thomas waited, giving her the space to find her words. "Daniel, he's not just wealthy. He's powerful. Connected. Sarah's voice hardened. When I tried to leave the first time, he had me committed. Told everyone I was having a breakdown. Her fingers traced the turquoise stones. 3 weeks in a private facility before I convinced the doctors I was stable. When I got home, he'd installed security cameras in every room. Thomas felt cold anger settle in his chest but kept his expression neutral, giving her the dignity of telling her story without his reaction overshadowing it. The night I finally left, he'd been drinking. He'd never hit me where it would show, but that night... Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her ribs. I knew if I stayed, eventually he'd kill me. So I ran with nothing but what I could fit in a backpack. You found your way here, Thomas said softly. Sarah met his eyes. I found you. The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Thomas stood slowly and crossed the small space, stopping within arm's reach. I wasn't there when Margaret needed me most. Haven't forgiven myself for that. He held Sarah's gaze. I'm here now. The cellar shook with a tremendous crack of thunder, and Sarah instinctively stepped closer to Thomas. Without thought, his arms opened, and she moved into them. They stood together, her head against his chest, his chin resting on her hair, while the storm raged outside. The weather radio crackled with a report of a dam breach upstream. Sarah looked up at Thomas, fear and determination mingling in her expression. Whatever happens, she said, thank you for these months, for making me feel human again. Thomas's hand came up to touch her cheek, the first truly intimate gesture between them. Sarah! A tremendous crash from outside interrupted him as the storm reached its peak, reminding them that some forces of nature couldn't be held at bay forever. Neither the flood threatening the ranch nor the feelings growing between them. The storm left its mark on the land. Uprooted trees, eroded pathways, and silt-covered fields. But remarkably, the house and main structures stood intact. The garden, protected by Sarah's careful preparations, survived with minimal damage. 2 weeks of relentless work restored the ranch to order, their shared labor cementing something neither Thomas nor Sarah had yet named. Autumn arrived with cooler temperatures and the promise of harvest. Sarah gathered the first ripe vegetables in a hand-woven basket Thomas had found in the attic, his grandmother's, made of yucca fibers and willow branches. The simple act of filling it with food they had grown together felt profoundly significant. The harvest festival at the reservation is tomorrow, Thomas said as they sorted tomatoes on the porch. We should go. Sarah's hands stilled. We. The whole community comes. Food. Music. My relatives will be there. Thomas watched her carefully. Time you met them properly. Sarah touched the turquoise necklace she now wore daily. Are you sure? I'm not. You belong with me, Thomas said simply, the words containing more meaning than their brevity suggested. The reservation community center bustled with activity when they arrived the next day. Booths displayed traditional crafts, food stands offered fry bread and stew, and elders supervised cultural demonstrations for the younger generation. Thomas guided Sarah through the crowd with a protective hand at the small of her back, nodding greetings to people who regarded him with surprise and Sarah with curiosity. Thomas Blackhawk, called a deep voice. Miguel approached with a wide smile, embracing his cousin before turning to Sarah. And the mysterious fence painter. About time my cousin brought you around. Sarah offered her hand, which Miguel shook warmly. Sarah, thank you for welcoming me. Any woman who gets Thomas to leave that ranch deserves a welcome. Miguel laughed, then lowered his voice. He's smiled more in the last 5 minutes than I've seen in 5 years. Thomas scowled, but the expression lacked conviction. We brought vegetables from the garden, he said, changing the subject. As the day progressed, Sarah met more of Thomas's extended family. An elderly woman, Thomas's Aunt Nora, reached out to touch the turquoise necklace, her eyes widening in recognition. My sisters, she said, looking from the necklace to Thomas with raised eyebrows. Yes, Thomas replied simply. Nora studied Sarah intently before nodding once, a gesture that felt like approval. Good strong hands, she told Sarah. Good for working the earth, for making things grow. Later, as traditional dancers performed, Sarah found herself seated beside Grace from the trading post. You've been good for him, Grace said quietly, nodding toward Thomas, who stood speaking with tribal elders. He was fading away out there alone. Sarah watched Thomas, noting how different he seemed here. More animated, connected to something larger than himself. He saved me, she admitted. Grace's eyes were knowing. Perhaps you saved each other. She hesitated, then added, if you ever need help, any kind of help, you come to me. Women need to look out for one another. The weight of Grace's words made it clear she suspected Sarah's situation. Thank you, Sarah replied, understanding the offer of alliance. As the sun began to set, a feast was laid out on long tables. Thomas and Sarah sat among his family, sharing the food they had brought. For the first time in years, Sarah felt part of something. A community, a future extending beyond mere survival. Their contentment shattered when Sarah noticed a stranger moving through the crowd, showing something on his phone to various attendees. He was well-dressed, out of place among the casual festival goers, and his methodical movements triggered Sarah's hard-earned instincts. Thomas, she whispered, nodding subtly toward the man. Thomas followed her gaze, his expression hardening. Stay here, he murmured, rising to intercept the stranger. From her seat, Sarah watched their interaction. Thomas's rigid posture, the man's obsequious smile, the exchange of words she couldn't hear. When the stranger held up his phone, she caught a glimpse of her own face on the screen. Thomas returned, his expression controlled but tension evident in the set of his jaw. Private investigator, he said quietly. Looking for Elizabeth Chambers. Showing her photo. Sarah's fingers clutched the edge of the table. Did he recognize me? Don't think so. Your appearance has changed. Thomas covered her hand with his. But he's asking about new arrivals in the area. Someone's narrowing the search. The drive home passed in tense silence. As the ranch came into view, the white fence gleaming in the moonlight, the garden awaiting tomorrow's harvest, Sarah voiced the fear that had haunted her for months. I've put you in danger by staying, she said. Daniel won't stop looking. Thomas parked the truck but didn't move to exit. Do you want to leave? The question hung between them, simple words carrying the weight of all they'd built together. No, Sarah answered honestly, but I might have to. The appearance of the private investigator changed something fundamental in their daily rhythm. Thomas began locking gates that had stood open for years. Sarah no longer worked outside alone. Unspoken tension filled spaces that had once held peaceful silence. 3 days after the festival, Thomas announced he needed to go into Phoenix. Legal matters, he explained vaguely. Be back by evening. Sarah spent the day restlessly patrolling the property, checking fences and gates with the hypervigilance she'd thought she'd left behind. In the study, she searched for a map to plan escape routes if needed, opening drawers she'd never explored. In the bottom drawer of Thomas's desk, she found a thick folder labeled Desert Creek Development. Inside were letters, proposals, and legal notices, the developer's persistent attempts to acquire Thomas's land. What caught her eye was a newspaper clipping mentioning the development company's primary investor, Chambers Technology Partners, Daniel's company. Sarah's hands trembled as she spread the documents across the desk. The connection couldn't be coincidence. Had Daniel tracked her here through his business interests? Or worse, had he been targeting Thomas's land even before she arrived? She was still staring at the papers when Thomas returned, the sound of his truck alerting her moments before he entered. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scattered documents and Sarah's pale face. You found it, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Did you know? Sarah asked, holding up the clipping with Daniel's company name. That my husband is connected to the people trying to take your land? Thomas shook his head. Not until after you showed me the newspaper article about yourself. Looked into it then. Why didn't you tell me? Didn't want you running again. The simple honesty of his answer cut through her rising panic. Sarah sank into the desk chair. This isn't coincidence, Thomas. Daniel never fails to get what he wants. If he wants this land, let him try. Thomas set his hat on the desk, then pulled an envelope from his jacket. Saw my lawyer today. Made some changes. Sarah opened the envelope to find legal documents. Thomas's will, amended to include her. If anything happened to him, the ranch would pass to Sarah, with provisions ensuring it could never be sold to Desert Creek Development or any subsidiary. Thomas, she whispered, overwhelmed by the implications. You can't do this. Already done. He knelt before her chair, meeting her eyes directly. Whatever happens, this land will never go to them. Never go to him. Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. I need to leave. He'll destroy you to get to me. Thomas's weathered hand covered hers. Running isn't living, Sarah. Before she could respond, the phone rang, a rare occurrence at the ranch. Thomas answered, his expression darkening as he listened. Grace, he said after hanging up. Private Investigator was at the trading post today, showing your photo, asking specific questions about me, about a woman staying at my ranch. Fear clutched at Sarah's chest. He knows I'm here. Not confirmed, but closing in. Thomas's jaw tightened. Grace told him nothing, but others might talk. Sarah stood abruptly, moving to the window. Beyond the white fence lay the open desert. Escape. I should go tonight, while there's still time. And then what? Thomas asked quietly. Keep running forever? Let him win. Better than watching him destroy you. Sarah's voice broke. He'll use everything: money, connections, the courts. He'll paint me as unstable, you as my abductor. Let him try, Thomas repeated, moving to stand behind her. Sarah turned to face him, tears threatening. You don't understand what he's capable of. I understand what I'm capable of. Thomas's voice remained steady. And what you are. The certainty in his voice broke something inside Sarah. The wall she'd built to protect herself, to protect him. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and for the first time, initiated contact, her arms encircling his waist, her face pressed against his chest. Thomas's arms came around her, one hand cradling the back of her head with unexpected tenderness. They stood locked together, the land deed with both their names still on the desk behind them. Physical proof of Thomas's commitment to their shared future. We fight, Thomas murmured against her hair. Together. Sarah lifted her face to his. Together, she echoed, the word a promise and a declaration. That night, they moved Sarah's belongings from the cabin to the main house, crossing a line that had stood between them since her arrival. As they worked, the radio played softly in the background, a news brief mentioning increased reward money for information about Elizabeth Chambers, missing wife of tech mogul Daniel Chambers. They turned it off and continued working in silence, preparing for the battle they both knew was coming. The first frost arrived early, silvering the land with delicate crystals that crunched underfoot as Thomas and Sarah prepared the ranch for winter. The garden was put to bed with careful mulching, tools cleaned and stored, and the last vegetables preserved in jars that lined the pantry shelves. Sarah's cabin, though no longer her sleeping quarters, had become her personal project. With Thomas's help, she had transformed the small structure into a warm, inviting space with repaired floors, fresh paint, and furniture Thomas had crafted. They never directly acknowledged the possibility that she might need to retreat there again, but the care they took in its renovation spoke of preparation for uncertain futures. Should teach you to shoot, Thomas said one morning, watching Sarah secure the chicken coop. Just in case. Sarah stiffened momentarily before nodding. Probably wise. At the far edge of the property, Thomas set up targets against the hillside. He placed a revolver in Sarah's hands. His father's .38 special, well-maintained and reliable. Heavy, she commented, feeling its weight. Meant to be. Thomas positioned himself behind her, adjusting her stance and grip with gentle, precise movements. Respect the weight. Means it can protect you. Sarah's first shots went wide, the recoil stronger than she'd expected. But by the end of the hour, she was hitting the target consistently, her determination overcoming her initial hesitation. "You're a natural," Thomas observed. Sarah lowered the gun, an unreadable expression crossing her face. "My father taught my brothers to shoot. Never me. Said women had no business with firearms." Thomas took the revolver, checking the safety before holstering it. "Your father was wrong." That afternoon, Sarah retrieved a letter from her hiding place in a hollowed-out book, correspondence from a women's advocacy group she'd contacted before fleeing Daniel. She'd finally responded to their offer of assistance, and their reply outlined legal options she hadn't previously considered possible. "They've connected me with a lawyer who specializes in cases like mine," she told Thomas, showing him the letter. "Someone who understands how men like Daniel operate." Thomas read carefully, his expression thoughtful. "Legal fight instead of hiding. It means revealing myself," Sarah acknowledged. "Going public with what happened. Daniel will fight back with everything he has." "You have evidence?" Sarah nodded. "I kept journals, recorded conversations when I could. And there's medical records, though he was always careful about visible marks." That evening, seated before the fireplace, they began planning in earnest. Thomas's military training emerged in his methodical approach. Contingencies for every scenario, defensive positions, alliance building. Sarah contributed her intimate knowledge of Daniel's tactics and weaknesses. "He believes himself untouchable," she explained. "His arrogance is his vulnerability." As they talked late into the night, their plans expanded beyond mere self-protection to actively reclaiming Sarah's freedom and securing Thomas's land against corporate encroachment. Winter arrived in earnest the following week with a rare desert snowfall that transformed the landscape into something ethereal. Sarah stood on the porch at dawn, watching her breath form clouds in the frigid air, marveling at the pristine white blanket covering the land. So different from the fence she'd painted months ago, yet somehow completing the image. Thomas joined her, wordlessly offering coffee. They stood together, shoulders touching, absorbing the transformed vista. "Beautiful," Sarah murmured. "Yes," Thomas agreed, though his eyes remained on her. The peaceful moment shattered with the distant sound of an approaching vehicle. Thomas set down his mug and reached for the binoculars kept by the door, focusing on the road leading to the ranch. "Black SUV," he reported, voice tight. Slow, deliberate. Sarah's hand found his arm, steadying herself as much as connecting with him. "The Investigator? Maybe." Thomas lowered the binoculars, staying on the main road for now, just watching. They remained on the porch until the vehicle departed, its purpose accomplished, a reminder that they were under surveillance, that the boundaries of their sanctuary were known to their enemies. Later that day, Sarah called the lawyer recommended by the advocacy group, speaking in low, determined tones while Thomas kept watch outside. When she emerged from the study, her expression was resolute. "I've decided to file for divorce and a restraining order," she announced. "The lawyer believes we have enough evidence to build a case, even against someone with Daniel's resources." Thomas nodded, pride evident in his eyes. "Fighting back. No more running," Sarah agreed, touching the turquoise at her throat. "It's time to stand my ground." That night, the mysterious SUV made another pass by the property, headlights cutting through the darkness like a warning. Christmas approached with a quietness that belied the gathering storm in their lives. Sarah had filed the initial divorce papers, setting in motion legal machinery that would inevitably draw Daniel's full attention. Thomas, meanwhile, had reconnected with the tribal council, attending meetings he'd avoided for years. "The tribal elder staff will be passed to you," Miguel told Thomas after one such meeting. "The council recognizes your return to community responsibilities." Thomas ran his hand over the ancient wooden staff, carved with symbols of Apache leadership and wisdom. "Not sure I deserve this honor." "It's not about deserving," Miguel replied. "It's about accepting your place in the circle. The elders have noticed your changed spirit since she came." Thomas couldn't deny the truth in his cousin's words. Sarah's presence had awakened something in him he'd thought died with Margaret: purpose, connection, the will to fight for something beyond mere survival. The tribal council's support extended beyond symbolic gestures. When Thomas explained the situation with Desert Creek Development and its connection to Daniel Chambers, the elders offered both practical and spiritual assistance. The tribe's legal team would review Sarah's case. Meanwhile, a protection ceremony would be held at the winter solstice. At home, Sarah worked with focused intensity, preparing for Christmas despite, or perhaps because of, the uncertainty shadowing their future. She had been crafting gifts in secret, using skills Thomas hadn't known she possessed. On Christmas Eve, they exchanged presents by firelight. Thomas gave Sarah a cedar box he'd carved with intertwining symbols, Apache protection signs flowing into the musical notes she'd once described from her teaching days. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tracing the patterns with her fingertips. Sarah's gift to Thomas was a handmade quilt, each square telling a story of their months together. The fence, the garden, the cardinal, the turquoise stones. "Each piece from clothing too worn to mend," she explained. "But together they make something new, something stronger." Thomas spread the quilt across his lap, recognizing fragments of his old shirts alongside scraps from Sarah's dresses. "Like us," he said softly. The intimacy of the moment expanded in the firelight, drawing them into a silence laden with unspoken feelings. Sarah's hand found Thomas's across the quilt, their fingers intertwining like the symbols on her box. "I love you," she said simply, the declaration both an offering and a question. Thomas's thumb traced circles on her palm, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I've known for some time," he answered. "Wasn't sure if it was right to speak it. Not with everything unsettled." "That's exactly why it needs speaking," Sarah replied. "Whatever comes, I wanted you to know." Thomas lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with reverence. "I love you," he said, the words emerging rough with emotion. "Have since you stayed to paint more than just one section of fence." Their kiss was gentle, tentative, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they separated, Sarah rested her forehead against his, their breath mingling in the quiet space between them. The peaceful moment shattered with the ringing of the phone. Thomas answered, his expression darkening as he listened. "Grace," he explained after hanging up, "Daniel Chambers has announced a $100,000 reward for information leading to you. It's hit the national news." Sarah paled, but her voice remained steady. "He's escalating. He knows you're fighting back." Thomas's jaw tightened. The legal papers would have been served this week. Their Christmas morning was interrupted by a final notice from Desert Creek Development, the offer now $5 million, with a thinly veiled threat about regulatory issues that could affect Thomas's water rights if he refused. "The timing isn't coincidence," Sarah observed. "They're coordinating with Daniel." Thomas nodded grimly, using all available pressure. That afternoon, they drove to the reservation for the protection ceremony. Tribal elders welcomed Sarah with unexpected warmth, painting traditional symbols on her hands, the same symbols that adorned the elder's staff Thomas now carried. "You stand with us against those who would take our land," the eldest explained to Sarah. "That makes you family." As they drove home under a sky filled with winter stars, Sarah gazed at the symbols on her hands. I've spent so long running, being nobody, belonging nowhere. Thomas reached across to take her hand. You belong here, with me, with my people. Sarah squeezed his hand, her decision crystallizing. Then it's time to stop hiding and start fighting. On our terms, not his. The Phoenix courthouse loomed imposingly as Sarah clutched her journal, a leather-bound book containing 2 years of meticulous documentation of Daniel's abuse. Her hands trembled slightly, but her spine remained straight as she walked beside Thomas and their lawyer, Meredith Yazzie, a formidable Navajo attorney recommended by the tribal council. Remember, Meredith advised, today is just the preliminary hearing for the restraining order. Keep your responses clear and factual. Inside, the clinical atmosphere of the courtroom heightened Sarah's anxiety. She had deliberately dressed conservatively, a stark contrast to the disheveled woman who had first appeared at Thomas's fence. When Daniel entered with his legal team, Sarah's breath caught. He looked exactly as she remembered, impeccably dressed, handsome, radiating confident authority. His eyes found hers immediately, his expression a practiced mixture of concern and relief that she recognized as completely artificial. Elizabeth, he murmured as he passed, ignoring Thomas entirely. The hearing proceeded with cold efficiency. Daniel's attorney portrayed Sarah as mentally unstable, claiming she had abandoned treatment for severe anxiety and paranoia. Mr. Chambers has been desperately searching for his wife out of concern for her well-being, the lawyer stated smoothly. He only wants to ensure she receives proper care. When Sarah's turn came, she presented her journal as evidence, her voice growing stronger with each word. I recorded everything, she explained to the judge. Dates, times, what was said, what was done. There are photographs on pages 67 through 82. The judge examined the journal with a neutral expression while Daniel maintained his concerned facade. But Sarah noticed the tightening of his jaw, the subtle tell she had learned to watch for during their marriage. Thomas testified next, describing Sarah's condition when she arrived at his property. She was malnourished, frightened, with healing bruises on her ribs and back. He stated, his deep voice steady. She flinched at sudden movements, wouldn't sleep more than an hour at a time for weeks. Daniel's attorney objected. Mr. Blackhawk has no medical qualifications to make such assessments. 23 years in the Army taught me to recognize the signs of abuse, Thomas countered, meeting Daniel's eyes directly for the first time. Grace Running Bear testified about Sarah's extreme caution during her first visit to the trading post, adding her observation as a former nurse about Sarah's physical and psychological state. When Daniel took the stand, he portrayed himself as the devoted husband blindsided by his wife's inexplicable departure. Elizabeth has struggled with anxiety and paranoid delusions, he explained with rehearsed compassion. She stopped taking her medication, became increasingly erratic. When she disappeared, I was devastated. His performance was flawless, and Sarah recognized the strategy, the same one he'd used when having her committed. Her heart sank as several of Daniel's colleagues testified to his exemplary character and her concerning behavior at company functions. The breakthrough came unexpectedly when Meredith cross-examined Daniel's former executive assistant. Ms. Reynolds, did you ever witness Mr. Chambers monitoring his wife's communications? The assistant hesitated. He had concerns about her mental state. Please answer the question directly, Meredith pressed. Yes, she finally admitted. He tracked her phone, monitored her emails and texts. And did you ever observe physical interactions between them that concerned you? The woman glanced at Daniel, whose expression remained impassive. I saw him grab her arm once, hard enough to leave marks. She wore long sleeves to the company picnic the next day. By day's end, Sarah was exhausted but hopeful. The judge granted a temporary restraining order pending the full hearing, ordering Daniel to maintain a distance of at least 500 feet. Outside the courthouse, Daniel's mask slipped momentarily as he passed them, his voice pitched for only Sarah to hear. "This isn't over, Elizabeth. You belong with me." Thomas stepped protectively closer to Sarah, but she straightened her shoulders and spoke clearly. "My name is Sarah, and I don't belong to anyone." That night, back at the ranch, Sarah sat on the porch watching the stars emerge while Thomas prepared dinner inside. The weight of confronting Daniel had left her drained but strangely lighter, as though speaking her truth aloud had released something long trapped inside her. Thomas joined her, setting a mug of tea beside her before taking the adjacent chair. "You were brave today." Sarah shook her head. "Not brave, just done with being afraid." She opened her journal, the physical record of her suffering now transformed into a weapon in her fight for freedom. Pages that had once been secret now stood as testimony, her private pain given voice and validation in the public record. "Daniel's right about one thing," she said quietly. "It isn't over." Thomas reached for her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "No, but now he knows you're not fighting alone." The temporary restraining order provided little comfort as January progressed. Daniel's black SUVs appeared with increasing frequency on the public road bordering the ranch, always staying just outside the 500-foot restriction. Thomas installed security cameras at strategic points around the property, silent sentinels that felt to Sarah like an admission that their sanctuary had been compromised. "We need to document everything," Thomas explained as he mounted the last camera overlooking the main gate. "Evidence for the court." Sarah nodded, watching him secure the weatherproof housing. The cameras represented both protection and intrusion, necessary surveillance that uncomfortably echoed Daniel's controlling tactics. "I never wanted to live behind lenses again," she admitted. Thomas paused, understanding flashing across his features. "Different purpose," he said simply. "These watch the boundaries, not you." Their lawyer called with concerning news. Daniel had engaged a prestigious PR firm specializing in reputation management. Within days, sympathetic stories appeared in various media outlets. The devoted husband searching for his troubled wife, the tech innovator balancing business success with personal tragedy. "He's controlling the narrative," Sarah observed, scanning the articles. "Just like he always does." More troubling were the posts appearing on local community pages. Stories painting Thomas as a manipulative influence isolating a vulnerable woman. Some mentioned his military background with insinuations about PTSD and instability. "Character assassination," Meredith explained during their weekly call. "Standard tactic when the facts aren't in their favor." The tribal council responded by issuing a formal statement supporting Thomas as a respected member of their community, but local attitudes were shifting. At the trading post, Grace reported hushed conversations that stopped when she approached and strangers asking pointed questions about the situation at the Blackhawk Ranch. "People are taking sides," she warned Thomas. "And money talks loud in hard times." Their concerns materialized when Thomas discovered a section of fence cut open at the back of the property. Precise work done with bolt cutters, not the random vandalism of teenagers. "They're testing our security," he told Sarah, reinforcing the damaged section, "seeing how we respond." That night, Sarah received an email from an anonymous account. The message contained only a photo of her and Thomas at the reservation festival months earlier, clearly taken without their knowledge, with a single line of text. "He can't protect you forever." Thomas immediately contacted Miguel, who organized a rotation of tribal members to help patrol the property. Their presence provided some reassurance, but Sarah found herself startling at every unfamiliar sound, the hypervigilance of her early days at the ranch returning with crushing force. During a strategy session with Meredith, Sarah made a decision. "I want to go public with my story," she announced. "A full statement about the abuse, the gaslighting, the commitment to the psychiatric facility, everything." Meredith looked concerned. "It's risky. Daniel will escalate further." "He's already escalating," Sarah pointed out. "But right now he's controlling the story." I need to take that control back. Thomas supported her decision without hesitation. Your voice. Your choice. Sarah worked for days crafting her statement with Meredith's guidance, detailing the psychological and physical abuse she'd endured, her escape, and her fight for freedom. They arranged for the statement to be published simultaneously on the advocacy group's website and through several women's rights organizations. The night before the statement's release, Thomas found Sarah standing by the newly repaired fence section, staring into the darkness beyond their property. Having second thoughts? He asked gently. Sarah shook her head, remembering the woman who started painting this fence 8 months ago. How terrified she was. How certain she'd never be safe again. Thomas stood beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. That woman was stronger than she knew. She found her strength here, Sarah replied, touching the white fence post. With you. Their moment of connection shattered as headlights appeared on the distant road, moving slowly toward the ranch. Thomas tensed, reaching instinctively for the revolver holstered at his hip. The vehicle stopped just within view, a black SUV identical to those that had been monitoring them. This time, however, it turned onto the private access road leading to their gate. Inside, Thomas ordered, already moving to intercept the approaching threat. Sarah hesitated only briefly before retrieving her own weapon from the house. When she returned to the porch, the SUV had stopped at the locked gate, its headlights illuminating the white fence like a spotlight on a stage. The driver's door opened, and a tall figure emerged, his silhouette unmistakable even at a distance. Daniel had come himself. Stay back, Thomas warned Sarah, moving forward to confront the man who had haunted their lives for months. Sarah stepped up beside him instead. Together, she reminded him. That was our agreement. As they approached the gate, security cameras recorded Daniel Chambers's first direct violation of the restraining order, evidence that would prove crucial in the days to come. Daniel stood at the gate, the headlights of his SUV casting long shadows across the ground. Despite the chill night air, he wore only an expensive suit that seemed grossly out of place against the rugged desert backdrop. Elizabeth, he called, his voice carrying the smooth authority that had once commanded boardrooms and intimidated rivals. We need to talk. Thomas stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Sarah. You're violating a restraining order. Leave now. Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm simply checking on my wife's welfare. I have concerns about her living situation. His gaze swept dismissively over Thomas and the ranch beyond. Elizabeth, this has gone on long enough. It's time to come home. My name is Sarah, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. And I am home. Daniel's expression hardened. You're confused. These people have manipulated you. The doctors all agree. The only manipulation has been yours, Sarah interrupted. I'm not confused, Daniel. I'm finally seeing clearly. Thomas took out his phone. I'm calling the sheriff. You're trespassing. Daniel glanced at the security cameras with a knowing smile. Before you do that, I think you should check your property. All of it. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as Thomas immediately called Miguel, who was patrolling the back section with 2 other tribal members. The call went straight to voicemail. Something's wrong, Thomas said, already moving toward the house to retrieve more substantial weapons. Daniel's voice followed them. This doesn't have to be difficult, Elizabeth. Just come with me now and your friend won't face any further troubles. Inside, Thomas quickly distributed emergency equipment, flashlights, radios, his hunting rifle. Stay here, he instructed Sarah. Call the sheriff and tribal police. I'm coming with you, she insisted, checking her revolver. Thomas shook his head. Daniel's the distraction. Whatever's happening elsewhere is the real threat. As if confirming his assessment, a security alert chimed from his phone. Motion detected at the southern fence line, far from the main gate where Daniel stood waiting. Sarah made the calls while Thomas slipped out the back door, disappearing into the darkness with practiced stealth. Minutes later, a series of shouts echoed from the southern property, followed by the crack of gunfire. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she rushed to the window. Through the darkness, she could see flashlight beams dancing erratically by the broken fence section. More shouting, another gunshot. Then silence. The radio crackled. "Sarah." Thomas's voice, tight with pain. "3 men cut through. Miguel's hurt. I'm hit, not bad. They're heading toward the house." Sarah's military training took over. She positioned herself strategically, turned off the lights, and waited, her revolver trained on the back entrance. Daniel's voice came from the front, closer now. He had opened the gate somehow. "Elizabeth, this is unnecessary. I have people throughout the property. Your protector is already down." Sarah didn't respond, focusing on the sounds of approaching footsteps from the rear of the house. When the door began to open, she fired a warning shot into the ceiling. "The next one won't miss," she called out. "I've contacted the authorities." The intruder hesitated, then retreated. Moments later, Sarah heard Daniel's angry voice issuing commands, followed by vehicle engines starting. When the tribal police finally arrived, they found Miguel unconscious from a blow to the head and Thomas with a bullet graze along his ribs. The intruders had fled, but they'd left behind bolt cutters and a dropped wallet containing a private security company ID. At the hospital, Sarah maintained a vigil beside Thomas's bed. The wound required stitches but wasn't serious, physically. The psychological damage of having their sanctuary violated cut deeper. "He planned this," Sarah said quietly as Thomas drifted in and out of sleep. "The confrontation at the gate was just to hold our attention while his men broke in from behind." Thomas nodded grimly. "Military tactic. Diversion and flanking maneuver." The sheriff arrived to take their statements, his expression troubled. "We've got Daniel Chambers for violating the restraining order, trespassing, and conspiracy. Your security footage is clear. But his lawyers are already making calls. Man like that has connections. What about the men who broke in? The one who shot Thomas?" Sarah demanded. "Private security contractors. Chambers is claiming he hired them for a legitimate security assessment of a property his company is interested in purchasing." The sheriff looked disgusted. "It's nonsense, but it muddies the waters." As morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, Sarah watched Thomas sleep, his face drawn with pain even in unconsciousness. The white bandage across his ribs was a stark reminder of what her presence in his life had cost him. Outside the room, reporters had already gathered, drawn by the news of gunfire at the ranch of a tribal elder and its connection to tech mogul Daniel Chambers. The peaceful life they had built together now lay exposed, like the broken section of fence that had once marked the boundary of their sanctuary. Sarah's public statement, released the morning after the attack, spread across social media with unexpected velocity. Her clear, unflinching account of Daniel's abuse resonated with thousands who shared their own stories in response. Women's advocacy groups rallied behind her, organizing support campaigns and legal fund donations. The narrative Daniel had carefully constructed began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. News outlets that had previously portrayed him as the concerned husband now questioned his actions, especially in light of the ranch incident. Thomas was released from the hospital after 2 days, returning to a ranch now under constant tribal police protection. The white fence, once a symbol of new beginnings, had been repaired again, this time reinforced with steel posts beneath the wooden exterior. "Your story has changed things," Meredith told Sarah during a strategy meeting at the ranch. "People are listening. But Daniel is cornered now, which makes him more dangerous." As if confirming her warning, Desert Creek Development filed an emergency petition claiming Thomas's land was contaminated with industrial waste, demanding immediate environmental testing that would require access to the property. "Transparent attempt to gain legal entry," Meredith observed. We'll fight it, but it shows how they're coordinating their efforts. The unexpected breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Sarah received an email from Daniel's former IT manager, James Chun. "I have something you need to see," the message read. "Something I should have shared long ago." After careful vetting by Meredith, they arranged to meet Chun at the tribal police station. He arrived nervous but determined, carrying a USB drive that he placed carefully on the table. "I was responsible for setting up Mr. Chambers's home security system," Chen explained. "The cameras, the monitoring software, all of it. What he didn't tell me initially was that he wanted the bedroom and bathroom cameras hidden." Sarah's hands clenched into fists as Chun continued. "I installed them as requested, but it never sat right with me. When I saw your statement online," he pushed the USB drive forward. "The system backed up to a secure server. I still had access credentials. These are clips from the 6 months before you left." The videos were difficult to watch. Daniel berating Sarah for imagined failures, controlling her movements, monitoring her communications. Most damning were recordings of physical intimidation and actual violence, along with footage of Daniel rehearsing concerned performances before speaking with doctors about her condition. "This is incontrovertible evidence," Meredith said, her voice tight with controlled anger. He recorded his own crimes. Chun looked at Sarah with genuine remorse. "I should have done something sooner." "You're doing something now," she replied, touching his hand briefly. "That's what matters." The evidence transformed their legal strategy. Meredith immediately filed for an emergency hearing, submitting the videos as proof of Daniel's systematic abuse and deliberate gaslighting. Public opinion shifted dramatically when carefully edited clips were released through proper legal channels. Daniel's company stock plummeted as board members called for his resignation. Several of his former employees came forward with corroborating accounts of his controlling behavior and ethical violations. Daniel's response was swift and ruthless. He held a press conference claiming the videos were manipulated, accusing Thomas of orchestrating a smear campaign motivated by territorial disputes over the land. He announced a lawsuit against Thomas, the advocacy groups, and even the tribal council for defamation and conspiracy. "He's desperate," Thomas observed, watching the press conference from their living room. "Cornered predators fight hardest." That evening, as Sarah and Thomas sat on the porch watching the sunset, a tribal police vehicle approached with grace from the trading post inside. "Someone left this for you," she explained, handing Sarah a package. "A woman I didn't recognize. Said you'd understand when you opened it." Inside was a burner phone containing a single video file and a note. From Daniel's executive assistant. "My resignation letter is being delivered tomorrow. Not afraid anymore." The video showed Daniel in his office, raging about Sarah's public statement, explicitly ordering his security team to make her regret ever leaving and do whatever it takes to bring her back. "The night of the attack," Sarah whispered, recognition dawning. "He's confessing to ordering it." Thomas squeezed her hand as they watched Daniel's unguarded moment of truth. The careful facade completely dropped, revealing the man Sarah had always known him to be. "Send it to Meredith," Thomas said quietly. "Then call the sheriff." As Sarah made the calls, Thomas stood at the fence line, watching the desert twilight deepen into night. The stars emerged above the mountains, the same stars his ancestors had used for guidance, the same stars that had witnessed Sarah's arrival months ago. Whatever darkness still lay ahead, the truth had finally emerged into the light. The courtroom hushed as Sarah entered, her steps measured and deliberate. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back, the turquoise necklace Thomas had given her visible at her throat. Thomas walked beside her, his presence steady despite the lingering pain from his healing wound. Daniel sat at the opposite table, immaculately dressed as always, but the confidence that had once seemed innate now appeared forced. The videos had damaged him professionally and personally, yet he maintained the bearing of a man certain of his ultimate victory. Judge Eleanor Martinez surveyed the courtroom with experienced eyes. "These proceedings have attracted considerable attention," she noted. "I want to be clear that this court will not be influenced by media coverage or public opinion. We are here to determine facts and apply the law accordingly." The final hearing for Sarah's divorce and permanent restraining order had become something larger, a public reckoning. Women's rights activists filled the gallery, many wearing turquoise in solidarity. Representatives from the tribal council sat in silent support. Sarah's testimony came first, her voice unwavering as she recounted the patterns of control, isolation, and abuse. She removed her wedding ring, a 3-carat diamond in platinum that had once felt like a shackle, and placed it on the evidence table. "This ring was the first thing he used to control me," she explained. "Not a gift of love but a mark of ownership. Every time I received a compliment on it, he would remind me later that people valued me only for what he provided." Daniel watched with narrowed eyes as Sarah detailed the escalating abuse and her escape. When she described finding sanctuary at Thomas's ranch, Daniel's attorney objected repeatedly, attempting to characterize their relationship as inappropriate. Judge Martinez overruled each objection. "The nature of their relationship is not relevant to whether abuse occurred, counselor." Thomas testified next, describing Sarah's condition upon arrival and the transformation he had witnessed. "She came to my land broken but not defeated," he stated. "I watched her rebuild herself day by day, painting that fence like she was reclaiming something stolen from her." When Daniel took the stand, his mask of concerned husband slipped repeatedly under Meredith's precise questioning. His answers grew defensive, then hostile, as she methodically exposed the contradictions between his public statements and private actions. "Mr. Chambers," Meredith pressed, "the video evidence clearly shows you ordering your security team to do whatever it takes to bring your wife back. What exactly did you mean by that directive?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "That footage is taken out of context." "Please answer the question, Mr. Chambers," Judge Martinez instructed. "I was concerned for her safety," Daniel insisted. "Living in isolation with a man who has military training and documented PTSD. That's not what you said in the video," Meredith interrupted, playing the clip again. "You specifically ordered them to make her regret ever leaving. Those were your exact words." As questioning continued, Daniel's composure fractured further. When Meredith presented financial records showing how he had systematically isolated Sarah by controlling her access to money, his response became openly contemptuous. "I built a billion-dollar company from nothing," he snapped. "Everything she had came from my work, my genius. She was nothing before me. A piano teacher from Nebraska with community college credentials." The gallery murmured as Daniel's mask fell away completely. "I gave her everything, a life most women would kill for, and she repays me by running to live in the dirt with." He gestured dismissively toward Thomas. "Him." Judge Martinez struck her gavel. "Mr. Chambers, control yourself." But Daniel had crossed a line he couldn't retreat from. His carefully constructed persona had crumbled, revealing the truth Sarah had always known. After 4 grueling hours, Judge Martinez delivered her ruling. Divorce granted, with a permanent restraining order requiring Daniel to maintain a distance of at least 1,000 feet from Sarah and Thomas. Additionally, she referred the evidence of criminal witness intimidation and the ranch attack to the district attorney for potential prosecution. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed as Sarah and Thomas emerged. Daniel exited shortly after, pushing through the crowd until he stood facing them across the courthouse steps. "This isn't over," he said, voice low enough that only they could hear. "You've cost me everything. I'll return the favor." Thomas stepped forward, but Sarah placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It is over, Daniel," she replied calmly. "You have no power over me anymore." As Daniel's security team hurried him toward a waiting car, Sarah turned to face the gathered press, Thomas solid beside her. The questions flew rapid-fire, but Sarah raised her hand for silence. "Today isn't about vengeance," she stated clearly. "It's about truth and freedom." Spring returned to the desert in a riot of colors. Wildflowers carpeting the land in purples and yellows, cacti crowned with brilliant blossoms. 1 year had passed since Sarah first appeared at Thomas's fence with paint-stained hands and haunted eyes. The ranch had transformed alongside its occupants. The garden now sprawled 3 times its original size, with neat rows of vegetables and a small orchard of young fruit trees. Solar panels gleamed on the south field, providing sustainable power to the property. The old barn had been renovated into a workshop where Thomas's carvings were displayed alongside Sarah's weavings and paintings, a small business that had gained unexpected popularity after their story made national news. Most significant was the community that had formed around them. Women from the reservation came weekly to learn gardening techniques from Sarah, while Thomas taught traditional carving methods to younger tribal members. The land that had once been his solitary refuge now pulsed with purposeful activity and shared knowledge. "Never thought I'd see the day," Miguel remarked, helping Thomas set up tables for the gathering they were hosting. "You, hosting a community celebration." Thomas adjusted the canopy against the spring sun. "Things change. People change," Miguel corrected with a knowing smile. Inside, Sarah arranged food with Grace and several women from the advocacy group that had helped her through the legal battle. The organization had recently opened a shelter in the nearby town, with Sarah serving as a volunteer counselor. "The last of Daniel's appeals was denied yesterday," Sarah told Grace quietly. "It's finally officially over." Grace squeezed her hand. "And Chambers Technology? Under new management. The board forced him out after the criminal charges." Sarah smiled slightly. "The stock has recovered. Apparently ethical leadership is good for business." The Morning Mail had brought one final piece of closure: official documentation that Desert Creek Development had withdrawn all interest in acquiring Thomas's land. Their investors had pulled out following the negative publicity surrounding Daniel's case, and the company had eventually folded. As guests began arriving, tribal members, lawyers who had worked pro bono, supporters who had stood with them through the darkest days, Thomas found Sarah in their bedroom, standing before the mirror adjusting the two-spirit blanket that draped her shoulders. The traditional Apache wedding gift was woven with symbols of balance and harmony, representing the joining of complementary spirits. "Having second thoughts?" Thomas asked, echoing the question she had once asked him by the fence. Sarah turned, her eyes clear and certain. "Not a single one." The ceremony took place where it had all begun, beside the white fence that Sarah had painted section by section, rebuilding her life with each brushstroke. Thomas stood tall in traditional Apache attire, the elder's staff in his hand symbolizing his reconnection to his heritage and community. Sarah wore a simple dress adorned with turquoise beads, her mother's locket around her neck alongside Thomas's mother's necklace. Past and present united. The tribal elder who performed the ceremony spoke in Apache and English, honoring both their traditions as they exchanged vows of protection, respect, and partnership. As the celebration continued into evening, Thomas and Sarah slipped away briefly to the quiet edge of their property. There, they planted a cottonwood sapling, a tree that would grow deep roots and provide shade for generations to come. "My grandfather would say a tree planted by 2 hearts grows stronger," Thomas said, patting soil around the slender trunk. Sarah leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder. "What do you think he would say about us?" Thomas considered this, watching the sunset paint the white fence in hues of gold. "That some fences keep things out," he replied softly, "and others mark where healing begins." Later, as they rejoined their guests, Sarah paused to watch Thomas speaking with Miguel's children, his usually stoic expression softened by genuine laughter. She thought about the broken woman who had appeared at his fence that hot summer day, desperate, hopeless, expecting nothing but temporary shelter. Instead, she had found strength, purpose, home. And in the simple act of painting a fence, she had begun to paint a future neither of them had dared imagine possible.